What is this place?
There is only one place it can be. The island kingdom of Numenor.
They say third time's a charm, and that's certainly true of this week's third episode of the Middle-earth series from Amazon Prime Video. Hi, I'm Dominic Patten.
And I'm Anthony D'Alessandro.
And welcome once again to Deadline's Inside the Ring, The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Aftershow.
Charmed indeed is what Halbrand is in this episode, as he and Galadriel are saved from a certain death at sea by Numenorian Captain Elendil, who brings the duo to the glorious island kingdom for an audience with Queen Regent and her court. Meanwhile, amongst the soon-to-be migrating Harfoots, the presence of the stranger is revealed, and family and clan bonds are tested.
As more of the orcs' evil designs are revealed in the Southlands, tensions, political and personal, begin to emerge in Numenor as Galadriel seeks the aid of the elf-weary kingdom to fight the orcs. Halbrand's true and perhaps royal lineage becomes clearer, old histories are unveiled, and new alliances are forming out of old bonds.
Elendil. Pray tell, what does it mean?
One who loves the stars.
That is not its only translation, is it?
It can also mean elf friend.
Then are you?
Talk about the decision by Elendil to bring Galadriel into Numenor.
I love my opening line of my character, which is one of the Eldar on my ship. Strange tides indeed. So there's an implication in there that he knows that this is quite a significant event and he has a responsibility to take the right action, which in terms of his moral code at the time is to save a life or indeed to save two lives. And I think where we find him is not necessarily conscious of quite what that decision will mean and the implications of it. And this is a theme for Elendil, is that so much of what happens in Numenor is a battle between his head and his heart. And his heart is faithful to the elves. And it's almost like an instinctive draw to Galadriel. And I think, again, because of his bloodline, which goes all the way back up to Elros, I think his body and soul is pulled towards the elves, even though his mind knows that to keep himself and his family safe pragmatically, he needs to keep himself under the radar of the difficulties of the political situation in Numenor.
Your captain here delivered us from certain death. All we ask is that Numenor grant us ship's passage to Middle-earth.
This was one of the most difficult sequences in the entire show to write because you're setting up so much. We called episode 3 a second pilot because you're introducing this big world and there's a lot of history that you sort of have to introduce before you can kind of get into the business of what the characters are doing. So we learned very early on that Numenor was gifted to a group of men by the gods for fighting alongside the elves in the big war in the First Age. And Halbrand, he doesn't know about this. His people fought alongside the enemy. So there's a big sort of difference right from the get-go. And then we also learned that the elves and the Numenorians used to be sort of in concert with each other. They had sort of an open trade agreement where elven ships would come and go freely. And then at a certain point, Numenorians began turning away elven ships. And nobody really knew why until eventually they cut off all contact. So right from the get-go, when Galadriel and Hal get to the court and meet Miriel, they're walking into an insanely loaded situation.
It's been generations since a ship of Numenor was permitted to make such a journey on an elf's behalf.
It is because of the elves that you were given this island.
Galadriel's just quite pilled at this point.
She does not have a lot of bedside manner.
No, she doesn't. And I love that about the elves. Like, we kind of know them from the Lord of the Rings, that they're kind of quite serene and but they make fun of each other a lot. They kind of laugh at lots of people a lot, and they're very arrogant. And so I find that's why I love when she meets like Miriel, because she's got a worthy opponent there. But yeah, she's not making Hal's life easy.
Her appearance in general is it sort of really disrupts that sense of, calm and the norm. For an elf to appear in Numenor is a very, very big deal. And now it's a question of what is the next step? What happens next? And so I think there is that sense of, not dismiss her out of hand, but going to her father and saying, the moment we fear has arrived.
There's sort of a political faction in Numenor. There are people who are sort of abide by the new ways, who are more about progress. And then there are people who are more inclined to favor the the old Elvish traditions. And they're kind of at loggerheads with each other. Miriel is reluctant to give Galadriel passage back. And, things almost come to blows, but Halbrand thankfully intercedes and manages to calm the situation down. But we soon learn that he does this because he has kind of a selfish reason for doing so.
Look around you. This is a paradise, ripe with opportunity. You really expect me to leap with you back into the furnace?
I think that he, with him wanting to start this fresh life, I think when he sees Numenor, he's in pure, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he thinks, well, hang on, this is really nice. I could maybe, there's something here for me, perhaps. Any kind of conflict, which you can see that she's in this state where things might be about to kick off. He's tempering that. He's trying to mediate and trying to calm the room.
Do try not to make any new enemies.
We see at the end of this interaction, the two of them parting, and now Galadriel's back where she began, which is by herself, right at square one.
It seems Morgoth has a successor.
Addai. Why would orcs refer to the leader by an Elvish word?
Sauron was said to have many names in days of old. Perhaps this is one of them.
So just between the three of us, who is Sauron?
I mean, honestly, there are a lot of theories about his identity that the fans have.
Sure. So I can't. Yeah. So Sauron is, I guess, existentially, he is, one of the most famous, one of the, most horrible villains in all of literature. He is a dark sorcerer who has, all manner of dark powers. But as for his identity in the show, I obviously can't answer that. But it's interesting because he was Morgoth's closest lieutenant. And after Morgoth fell, he kind of disappeared for a while. There's like a few hundred years where he's unaccounted for in Tolkien's writings. And so he could kind of be any place at any time. We don't know where he is. But, he was spoken about at this time as kind of just a guy. So he could kind of be anyone.
I've told you countless times. Nobody goes off trail and nobody walks alone. We have each other. We're safe.
You're the matriarch here in this
am.
particular part of the story, and you are also trying to be the kind of voice of reason with your husband, with your with the children, and to some extent with the stranger, and to some extent with all of the group. That scene when we learn where there is the day before the migration festival, and that's really where we really see who your character is. Give us a sense of how that developed and how Marigold really blossomed from that point on.
There was a lot of working together, and I worked a lot with my husband, Dylan Smith, playing Largo, on developing our relationship and how our characters interact. And as you say very well, it wasn't just Nori that I had to keep in line, but him as well. But then that moment before the festival when that happens to his ankle, and we are suddenly in another level of jeopardy because we might be left behind. And that's really when I think you see Marigold's true fear, which is the protection and love of her family. Which is why she's so annoyed and angry at Nori. It's not just about the carelessness of Nori as her daughter, it's the carelessness of Nori in taking care of her family. That's where Marigold's fears really come to the fore, and then what will happen after that, we'll have to see.
Good little Harfoots. Stick to the path, flee every danger, heaven forbid. We explore something new.
Eleanor Kellermark Brandyfoot. Our way has kept us alive 1,000 years.
That scene was definitely one where we knew it was coming up, and it's one of the ones that when you see it in the schedule, you're excited for it, but you dread it because you know that you have to do it justice, and it's such a pivotal moment for her and the family and for Nori and Marigold and their relationship. You see even in the first episode, Marigold and Nori, there is that tug again of Marigold trying to understand and understanding Nori's kind of innate curiosity, but also trying to kind of remind her of her place and what it means to be a Harfoot and to accept that instead of rebel and push against it. So I think the stranger's entrance is a catalyst. It kind of exposes, I guess, how intensely the community feel about holding on to tradition to keep them safe. And Nori really wants to prove that actually keeping them safe may be creating new traditions and creating revolutionaries out of traditionalists. And it was also shot, it was raining, we couldn't film for a few hours.
And Sara, who's amazing as Marigold, we had to stay, both of us had to stay in this space, as did all of the actors. But it was just amazing to have to stay in that headspace, and then you'd had Selene Henry, who plays Sadik, at one point, because of the rain and everything, the prosthetic ear just started peeling off, and he'd be giving me a talking to with this ear just flopping. So it was really kind of an amalgamation of chaos and love, and then just questioning, how far you would go for someone you love or for a family that you love, and the risk sometimes you have to take to prove that love.
Can we talk about the scene at the festival where you become revealed and the fear that the stranger reveals?
I think that's right, because actually up until that point we've got a being that hasn't witnessed anything like the number of other beings as this. He's come into contact with Nori principally on her own, a couple of times with Poppy, but generally Nori. And so understanding then that she and all her intrigue is part of this other group, I think is hugely discombobulating for him. He's not necessarily ready for that. He hasn't thought about that. He's not at that stage of of his sort of consciousness. So I think that's real. Plus, he's also, as we've just seen in 3, he's found something that I think has connected, deep down, and he's really been sort of cooking on that from internally, so that when all the awfulness breaks loose for him, it's even more frantic and upsetting. So yeah, I think that is a big moment for him.
And it was frantic and upsetting for the Halfwits as well.
Right.
It's quite a big moment for everybody.
Right.
It's that when they first come together,
yeah.
It's very discombobulating, the two worlds meeting.
Yeah, and I love that idea. I love the idea that Nori hasn't communicated to him that he must not, that these other people exist, or that in fact that the stranger is unknown to them. So it's just a normal thing for him to look around and try and find the being that he relates to, Nori. And of course, that's the exact thing that he shouldn't say, because that gets her in
a lot of trouble. Yeah, that's right.
A whole heap of trouble.
Yeah.
Chan's proud fellow.
We get a fuller understanding that Poppy is an orphan.
Yes.
And that is definitely part of her relationship to Nori and Nori's family, and perhaps even more to the stranger. For you, playing a character who is a part of this traveling man, someone who is now alone in the world, how did that inform the character for you?
I remember when Patrick and JD were telling me about this, and it was very beautiful. When Poppy's family passed in a previous migration, it was sort of created and set up that Poppy would just keep going and would tell the Brandyfoot family. And from there, the whole community begins to know. Traditionally, what happens in the Harfoot community is if there is sort of I don't want to say a weak link, but it kind of is. Something that could potentially, isolated. That's it, would be either decaravaned or would just sort of be left behind because they wouldn't be able to survive by themselves. But what the entire encampment did was help Poppy rebuild her life. So the cart that you see Poppy pulling was built by Largo, who was the wheelsmith. And it was built by the entire community. And every family has their own cart. So she is carrying the Proudfellow name. Whenever they set up camp, she's next to the Brandyfoot family. She's there for dinner. But she can also, go off and do her own thing as well. So she really does feel a sense of responsibility in different ways to Nori, in the sense of it's not responsibility about family, but it's responsibility about being a Harfoot and having to survive on your own and understanding why the rules are there, why they are put in place, and the importance of them and the importance of safety. So she's strong, she is a fighter, and she is a survivor, and she has seen so much. And I think the fact that the stranger comes in and shifts absolutely everything rocks her boat. She doesn't like him. The amount of times Nori's like, we've got to do this. She's like, no. She says in episode 3, I don't want to help him. And that's because of her past and everything that she's been through and everything that she's had to build as well in order to ensure safety and survival for the people that she loves.
You had, I guess one could call it the privilege in the world of Tolkien of introducing Numenor to us on screen for the first time. Let's look a little bit about that opening scene where we see this grand harbor and the ship comes in.
What we were trying to do with that opening scene was, introducing the grandeur, the splendor, the magnificence of Numenor. But we knew that we couldn't just open on a big wide, because all of the amazing architectural detail, all of that design would just be lost. It would be too much to take in just one single shot. So we knew we needed to slowly reveal pieces that would then build on top of each other, each one becoming bigger and more epic, and then eventually building a crescendo into the moment that Elendil's boat passes under the bridge, and then we crane up to reveal the harbour in all its splendour. And then together with Bear's fantastic score, we hope that it is a goosebump moment.
My starting point was thinking about the instrumentation that Howard Shore used in the films and wanting to honor that. There's a foundation of solid orchestral writing and choral works, solo voices, choirs, and even some of the other specialty instruments he used, Irish penny whistle and nickel harpa, which I always loved the way he used. That was sort of my starting point, because we have so many different factions, so many different characters, so many different realms to explore. I knew I needed more colors. So for the Harfoots, I brought in West African percussion, mallet instruments called balafons. I brought in for the Stranger the sounds of a Balinese gamelan ensemble, these metallic ringing bell tones that form this motor that sort of plays through his scenes. Numenor is an environment we haven't seen on screen before, so I brought in Middle Eastern instruments, Middle Eastern harmonic progressions, a Turkish instrument called a yaili tambor, which is like a banjo with a 4-foot neck. It's this really exotic, beautiful instrument. Armenian duduk, Middle Eastern frame drums. I did this because I wanted Numenor to have a Babylonian feel. I wanted it to feel like an ancient society, even compared to the societies that we've seen in Lord of the Rings so far. And more importantly, I wanted to have, at least for Numenor, a set of colors and a musical language that could go extinct and vanish from the score, so that one day, when fans watch our show, and then they go right into Peter Jackson's trilogy, they'll notice that there's a continuity in the score, but there's this one family of instruments that does not go forth, and I want them to feel its absence when they go back to the films.
Ears and feet, how was it working with prosthetics?
We had an amazing prosthetics team. So when we first started, the ears were totally fine. They fitted beautifully. You didn't even know they were on. But the feet, we had a bit of a challenge with at first. They were a little painful, and we were very, very glad to take them off at the end of the day. But the prosthetics team, they just kept working on it, reforming them until the end. They actually felt like our own feet. And I really didn't want to take them off. I had a question about what would I like to take away from set. And I said, my prosthetic feet, I'd like to just have them on weekends and, chill out in front of the television. And also, the minute you had them on, they very much gave you this grounding, half-footy feel. They were the last piece of the puzzle to connect into character. It was great.
I loved watching the Halfoots move around. It was such a specific...
It was a really specific walk that we worked on. And even between takes, sometimes we'd be there and doing certain movements together to just keep that half-footy feeling, and it definitely lived in the feet.
Half-footy feeling sounds like a disco song.
You get that half-footy feeling.
Cast song.
Good, yeah.
That's it for today on Deadlines Inside the Ring.
Join us again next week for more of the Inside Scoop on Prime Video's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power.
Oh, let it go, knife is.
Whoa, oh my god! I see the
See you later.
We have to try everything.
Hello.
Keeping this for later.
I don't care about the show. I just want a good blooper reel.
I want to learn science.
You guys are going to make me look like I'm in the show, right? You're going to put in the effects. Replace the green. I don't want to look like an asshole here.
Sorry.